7 serious suggestions to make your fantasy football leagues more fun, starting right now. What's going on, everybody? Dave Richard from CBS Sports with you. Thank you for tuning in. I gave 7 suggestions on the CBS Sports website to make fantasy leagues more fun. I encouraged everybody to show their commissioners these ideas and then get back to me with ideas of their own. And you guys did. We're going to get into all of that right now. But at first, I thought I'd just say thank you for watching, for reading, for being a part of the Fantasy Football Today crew. We really appreciate it here at CBS Sports and CBS Sports HQ. Okay, 7 ideas. I wrote about them on the website. I want to go over them. And one by one, we'll go into our inbox and see what kind of reactions we got to each of the ideas. As we go along, they're going to go from normal basic ideas that every league should do to some really weird ones. Hope you guys enjoy it. Here we go. Number 1, IR spot should be universal. Now, you know what an IR spot is. The NFL has adopted them during the COVID era about having players that go on injured reserve and then they can come back from injured reserve. Each team can bring back 8 players. That was the rule in 2022. Fantasy football is supposed to mimic the NFL. So why not have that in every league? On CBSSports.com, on our platform, only half of the leagues actually use injured reserve spots. It's a great way to kind of not punish the fantasy managers who have a player, gets hurt, goes on injured reserve, and then they've got to make a decision on whether they have to cut that player and put him onto the waiver wire or to go ahead and just stash him on the bench. Now with the IR spot, they can just throw him on the IR spot. They can pick up another player off of waivers, and they can go ahead and use that player that they picked up off waivers until the guy on IR is healthy enough to come back. Then they're going to have to make a decision. Obviously, you can't stash healthy players on injured reserve. I think that this is something that every fantasy league should do. Yes, there will be some fantasy managers that take advantage of the rule. They will find some players like Jameson Williams this year, who started the year on injured reserve. They'll draft those guys late, and then they'll pick up a player off of the waiver wire once waivers open to begin the season. That's fair game. I think it's okay to stash players on IR if they're actually IR eligible players. That's an important distinction to make. I think that this is something that fantasy managers and fantasy commissioners should adopt across the board. We do have an email from Mike. Here's the email. Hi, Dave. Just read your article about suggestions. The one that I wholeheartedly endorse is injured reserve spots on the bench. Some leagues have too short of a short bench so that even a single injury to a player that is too good to drop can severely hamper a season. Well, that makes perfect sense. You don't want to go and have to make tough decisions. And more importantly, you don't want to help other teams in your league get better. Just think about J.K. Dobbins. We talked about him all year long. Started the year on IR, came back, played, got hurt again, went on IR, and then he finished the season really strongly. If you had to cut J.K. Dobbins, you're potentially helping someone else in your league. So I implore you, go to your league commissioners, ask for anywhere from 2 to 5 IR spots. He should say it's fine. If the NFL is doing it, your fantasy league should be doing it too. All right, concept number 2, reward offensive fumbles for touchdowns. You catch a touchdown in fantasy, that's worth 6 points. You run for a touchdown in fantasy, that's worth 6 points. You throw a touchdown in fantasy, that's worth 3, 4, or 6 points, depending on your league. We don't have any consensus on that one. But when you recover a fumble in the end zone, if that player is on your team and you start him, that should be worth 6 points too. I'm thinking back to that Treylon Burks play. It was really more of a Derrick Henry play. Henry's rumbling toward the end zone. Somebody knocks it out of his hand. Treylon Burks jumps on top of it in the end zone. Yeah, it's kind of a cheap touchdown for Treylon Burks, but he still made the play. He scored the touchdown. 6 points for Treylon Burks, and it should be that way for fantasy managers. This should easily be universal. Every single league, it should be default. In fact, it is default on CBS Sports. And that way you don't have to go rush to your Twitter feed and at me and say, hey, do I get credit for that Treylon Burks touchdown? When does it show up in my league? Yes, you're going to get credit for it. That's how it should be. Your player scores a touchdown. You get 6 points. Why am I still talking about this? I shouldn't be. It's over. That's what you should do. Make sure that offensive fumble recoveries count for 6 points. We don't even have any emails about that one. So let's move on. Concept number 3, use 2 flex spots. Now, the league requirement, the most popular one on CBS Sports in our leagues, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end. I'm running out of fingers. 1 flex, along with kickers if you use them, a defense, a quarterback. I think you should use 2 flexes. And that way, most lineups would start 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 2 flex, and a tight end. It just gives you more flexibility. Look, the NFL, they're getting creative with how they use their players. You've got tight ends playing running back and quarterbacks playing tight end and wide receivers playing running back. Why not have that in fantasy as well, where you can just have a little bit more added flexibility to who you start from week to week? And it alleviates one lineup decision each week for everybody in the league, because now you're not freaking out over which player to start in your flex. You've got 2 flex spots. It just makes it a little bit easier. And it also takes pressure off of draft day. And when you make your waiver wire moves, now you're not forced into drafting so many running backs or so many wide receivers. Now you can go ahead and just be a little bit more flexible. You could start 4 wide receivers. You could start 3 tight ends. I like 2 flex spots. I've been using it in our mock drafts when I've been in charge of our mock drafts on the CBS Sports website. And I encourage everybody to at least ask their commissioner, hey, why not use an extra flex spot? It just makes your team better and you'll score more points. It's a little bit more fun that way. Concept number 4, ditch waivers. Use a free agent acquisition budget, or FAB, because I'm lazy and I don't want to say free agent acquisition budget 6 more times while talking about this. Instead of using the old waiver process of, okay, first in line gets a player, then the next player, or the next manager gets a player after that, everybody gets a budget. Usually the commissioner gives $100 fictional dollars to everybody in the league that they can use to spend to get anybody they want who's a free agent. The more you bid on a player, the more likely you are to get that player. Whoever has the highest bid for a player gets that player on their fantasy team. It's like eBay, but for fantasy football. And it's way more fair than waivers, because now you're not rewarding the bad teams who have priority to get the better waiver wire pickups every single week. Now everybody has the same chance to do it. And usually once a year, there's going to be a big time free agent that's going to be on the waiver wire and everybody's going to chase him. And people are going to start putting down a lot of their fab for him. But the smart fantasy managers might not do it. It adds another layer to the fantasy experience. That's really what it does. And I think it's a lot of fun. And I think everybody should go and add fab instead of waivers. That's a really easy change to make on CBS Sports leagues and really every single league, to just go and ditch the idea of, okay, I want player A and I'll cut player B. No, now you have to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. We do have a reaction to this idea. It's from Darren. He says, my league is finally transitioning to fab. The guys who stay up late to gobble up the secondary free agents without losing waiver position will no longer have that edge. This is a real thing. There are actually people, I know these people, I might even work with some of these people. They'll set an alarm at like 3 a.m. and they'll grab their smartphones and they'll go to the waiver wire and they'll see who didn't get picked up. Remember, this isn't with the fab, this is with old school waivers. And they're just going to start picking up those players that didn't get picked up, and they'll drop their jabronis that they don't want anymore off their bench, and they make their team better without being penalized or being in a certain order. Fab ends all that. You can't do that if you have to go and spend your fictional budget to get players on your team. So I'm with Darren. I think this is the most fair way to add free agents to your fantasy team week after week after week. Tell your commissioners about free agent acquisition budgets, aka fab. Concept number 5. Concept number 5. This is a big one. De-emphasize full PPR. Now, PPR became a thing, I really want to say like around 15 years ago. Like I remember when I started playing fantasy, giving points for a catch, it was a foreign idea. We never did it. And then 15 years ago, people started doing it because it's more points, it's more fun, it makes receivers a little bit more valuable. Okay, I get that idea. But now it's like if you've got a player that catches 5 balls for 70 yards, that's as good as a running back who runs 10 times for 60 yards and a touchdown. Not in my mind. I think it's terrible. The act of catching a ball, it's important for football, obviously, but when a receiver catches a screen pass and only gains 2 yards, that's a point. That's as good as 10 yards. It kind of bugs me a little bit. So I don't think that full PPR should be the way anymore. And we need to have an open dialogue about what should replace full PPR. And lucky for you, and maybe unlucky for your commissioner, there are a bunch of different ideas that you could have to replace full PPR. It could be as simple as half PPR. You just make it a half a point per catch. Now that 5 for 70 game, that's 9.5 points. That's less than 60 yards and a touchdown. I think that that's a little bit more reasonable. You're still rewarding the catch. You're just not rewarding it a full point like you were before. What about point per first down? And maybe it's more full point for receiving first down, half point for a rushing first down, quarter point for a passing first down, Look, I think first downs are really important when it comes to the NFL. That's how teams get to build drives and eventually score points. Duh, you already knew that. That seems a little bit better to me. Not as many points would be scored, but I like that. Or you can do what Heath Cummings has suggested on many occasions, hat tip to Heath, half point for PPR, half point for every first down gained. That's a nice, reasonable mix. I wouldn't have a problem with that either. Or you could just reward a full point per catch after a certain amount of catches. Here's an example. Take the 5 for 70 guy that I said at the beginning of this. Let's say the first 3 catches count for nothing. That 4th catch, that's worth a point. 5th catch, that's another point. You get a point for every catch, starting with your 4th catch, your 5th catch, your 6th catch, and so on. I don't mind that because the players that get a lot of catches from week to week, those are guys that are typically valuable players to their own teams. And so they should be valuable in fantasy as well. So those are 4 ideas that you could go and replace full PPR with. And if your commissioner is still giving you some static about, no, we need to have full PPR, just remind them of Chris Godwin's 2022 season. He barely had 1,000 yards. He scored 3 times, but because he caught 104 passes, he was 15th in PPR points per game. Something doesn't sit right with me with that. Catching 104 passes, that's awesome. But the rest of those stats, I don't know if I dig that. We definitely got some reactions to this one. Let's hear what the people had to say. Here's one from Steven. Loved your article here about tweaks to make one's league. I hate full PPR leagues. We are a quarter point per reception and award 1 point for every 5 carries. A point for every 5 carries really doesn't move the needle much for me. And a quarter PPR, I guess that's cool too, right? Because now you're not really making catches that much more valuable. So I like it. You're giving these stats meaning in fantasy without necessarily making them overpowering to where there's players that aren't really that good that become good just because of fantasy. All right, let's move on. And let's talk about concept number 6. When Travis Kelce retires, he retires the tight end position along with him. And you don't even have to wait until Travis Kelce retires if you really don't want to. You can just go ahead and say, hey, tight ends, they're annoying. Kelce's great. Mark Andrews is supposed to be great. Kyle Pitts has been supposed to be great for 2 years or whatever. Let's get those guys. Let's de-emphasize that in fantasy. And maybe you could even do this in conjunction with the 2 flex spots. Here's what I'm getting at. You just turn tight ends into wide receivers and you include them in. Now, some people will say, that's not right. That's not the way that fantasy should be. NFL teams use tight ends. What does this voice then do? I don't even know, but whatever. They're annoyed by that. They want tight ends to be there. I think when Kelce retires, there won't be even 3 players that are going to be big-time, major fantasy football studs at the position. And then we're just talking about like annoying players that we have to start just because they're tight ends. All right, the position almost devalues itself without somebody like Travis Kelce there. I mean, it already is. Kelce's such a stud and such an advantage to everybody that he's being taken as a first-round pick. There isn't anybody that you'd even consider taking in round 1 or really round 2 other than Travis Kelce at tight end. Now, round 3, you could look at Mark Andrews, but he's coming off of a bad year. And let me tell you, there is nothing more frustrating in fantasy than having a tight end who is supposed to be good, and then they end up being absolutely terrible for your fantasy team. You can ask anybody that drafted Kyle Pitts over the last 2 years, and they'll tell you how much that stinks, especially when somebody like Taysom Hill, who's not even a real tight end, goes off and has a good year. Taysom Hill was 11th in PPR points per game, and he barely caught any passes last year. How frustrating is that? So really, the tight end position, once you get past the superstars, you're banking on a guy to catch a touchdown. Do we really need tight ends in fantasy football? Is it really that important to have them? I say no. And I wonder if commissioners would agree with me on something like that. And I wonder if it's already happening because we got no reaction, no static, no nothing to that concept. No one stood up for tight ends. So I'm going to continue to push for this year after year. And then when Kelce retires, whenever that is, I'm really going to push for it. Tight ends, lump them in with wide receivers or use them in flex spots. There is one concept left, and this one definitely got plenty of reaction. Concept number 7, the mulligan. Now, you know what a mulligan is if you play golf or pretty much make a mistake in your life. You go, oh, let me get a do-over on that. Let me get a mulligan. Could there be do-overs in fantasy football? Is that really something that we want to open Pandora's box for? I think it's worth a discussion. I think it's worth talking about. because it's a chance to fix a mistake that you make when setting your lineup. And it might even be an unforced error. You might have started a player who got hurt in the first half, and now you have the opportunity to replace that player. I laid out a bunch of different ideas on the website about how you could go about using the mulligan. It could be as simple as one time per year, you get to make a change. Now, it can't be an after-the-fact change. You can't start a player on Sunday, and by the time the Monday night game's wrapping up, you're going, mulligan. That's not going to work. You're not allowed to do that. But what if you've got a player that's getting off to a bad start or gets hurt, like I said, and you can replace that player with a guy who hasn't played yet? Once a year, if you're allowed to do that in your league, maybe you should be. Maybe you should be allowed to do that once every month in your league. Maybe you could even get away with doing that once a week in your league. Can you imagine that? You make a mistake in your lineup and there's a player who's underperforming in the first half and you say, all right, I'm using my mulligan, take this jabroni out, put in this stud player, and cross your fingers that the stud player does well. Of course, why would a stud player be on your bench? That's a different question for a different time. I think it would make fantasy a little bit more interesting. I think it would frustrate the guys that you're playing, but they would have the opportunity to have mulligans too, and they can use their mulligans against your team, be it every week, once a month, once a year. Might not be a popular concept, but it's one that I think is worth talking about. Let's go to the reaction. How about being able to sub players at halftime? Player gets hurt in the first half or benched or something like that, and so instead of getting a donut for the second half, you can replace them at halftime. We live in an era where you've got access to your fantasy team on your phone. Where is my phone? I don't even know why my phone isn't here right now, but we can pretend that it's here. Yes, you can go on your phone and you can make changes to your lineup. If your commissioner would allow that, that would kind of fall in line with the mulligan idea. Would it work? Sure. Would it suck if you're without your phone? Yeah, it kind of ties you to your phone during the games, but a lot of us are paying attention to our games anyway, every single Sunday and Monday and Thursday. Yeah, we love fantasy, so of course we're going to be connected to it. So it's an idea that as long as it's before halftime, you can make a substitution. Yeah, sure. If your commissioner will allow that, if your league is cool with it, I think that adds a lot of intrigue to fantasy football. There's another one. Greetings, Mr. Richard. This is from Eddie. I just read your suggestions article. I'll definitely be considering some of them. The mulligan has me most interested. Finally, a chance to have a say with in-game events. Of course, that's the point of this, is to have in-game events that makes you more interested and more tied to your fantasy team. It makes some sense. Now, of course, it kind of waters down the fantasy experience because half the fun of playing is setting your lineup and then looking good when you've got a prediction right and you've started the right player, and then feeling like a lump of coal, feeling like a dead guy, feeling like crapola, feeling like the poop emoji, feeling like a guy who just got rejected by a supermodel. Not that I would know any of those things. If you feel bad for making a lineup decision, that's part of fantasy football as well. That's the fun of the game of it. So when you make a bad lineup decision, you should have to live with it. But maybe now you don't have to, because we've got the technology. We live in the world that we're in where you can go and change your lineup and use the mulligan. So those are my 7 concepts. But I'm not the only one that came up with ideas and suggestions. You guys did too. And these are ideas that I haven't even read yet. I'm going to read to you right now and react to them in real time right here on this video. Let's get started. Here's one. This is from Eddie, who wrote in earlier about the mulligan, and he's going to consider it in his league. One stat I've always wished for: tackles for loss. I've never seen it as a setting, and it looks and feels so much like a sack. Why not reward it for the defense? Eddie, we got a lot of emails about improving defensive scoring. This is one idea. And a turnover on downs is another idea. So imagine you start a defense and they're at the goal line and it's 4th and goal from the 1 and the Chargers are going for it. And of course, they're not going to get it because they're the Chargers, but your defense stops them. You should get points for that. What are the points that you get for a turnover in fantasy leagues? An interception is 2 points. A fumble recovery, usually 2 points. Why couldn't a turnover on downs also be 2 points? And it's kind of like a little sweetener on top of your DST when they win the game late, because an offense, they'll have nothing to really play for other than try to put points up, and they'll go for it on 4th down, and it'll be like 4th and 9, and the quarterback will heave it, and it'll be incomplete, and it's a turnover on downs. It's a little extra points for your DST. I like that, and I like the tackle for loss as well. I think that that's a good suggestion. From Mike, here are a few changes to add, both in regards to defense and how they score. Do not penalize the defense for points scored against if the offense threw an interception for a touchdown. Likewise, the same on a fumble recovery for a touchdown, or a blocked field goal, or punts for touchdown, safeties by the offense as well. Yeah, we definitely have that setting on CBS Sports. You can find that on our platform. Number 2, if the team you pick on defense also wins the game, reward an extra like 3 points. I know this counters the above. Okay, so you're saying that you get points for your defense winning. Throughout the years of covering fantasy, I've heard about teams drafting coaches and you get points for a coach if his coach wins a challenge or wins the game. This could follow suit. This is a possibility where your defense gets a few more points if they win the game. Does your defense lose points if they lose the game, though? See, now if we had that on top of it, that would make starting a DST a lot more interesting. We've got a lot of interesting ideas on this video for DSTs. Could make it a much more important position if we implement all of them, don't you think? Here's one from Jacob. Very interesting article. I was glad to find that in most cases, I've done most of these over the years to varying degrees of success. One of the things I have done that have been huge, and I feel I could help a lot of leagues, is this. At the end of the year, the consolation bracket players are playing for draft position the following year. I'll stop right there. We do this in my keeper league every year. It makes perfect sense. It allows the fantasy managers that didn't make the playoffs to still be invested in the league, to still have a lineup, and to still play a head-to-head matchup to help their draft position the following year. Now, those teams should not be allowed to make ad drops off the waiver wire. Don't let them touch the free agents, but let them set a lineup. Let them see if they can actually do good in those late weeks of the regular season. And if they do, they get rewarded for it with higher draft position. I made my keeper league's toilet bowl this year and lost. So I'm not going to have the number 1 pick in my keeper league. Thanks a whole lot, Mark Swiderski. Here's an email from Andy. Thank you for your article on adding interesting pieces to the league. One that our league uses after much fiddling is awarding running backs half a point per carry. It was actually a full point per carry for years. The rise of RBBC made the workhorse full-time backs too valuable. At half PPC, that's point per carry if you haven't been paying attention for the last 12 seconds, there's a pretty good balance between elite running backs and wide receivers, as well as a better balance between second-tier carry-only and receiving backs. We do also use full PPR. So I've always been on the fence about rewarding carries in a major way. Earlier in the video, we talked about a point for every 5 carries. That's 0.2 points per carry, basically. I'm okay with something like that. This is a half point per carry. It does give a little bit more value to the running backs. But if you're going to give a full point per catch, then it definitely, it's almost like a tug of war, right? Because if you don't have that point per carry, but you have points per catch, the receiver's value goes up. Tight end value goes up. Running back value, the elite guys, the Austin Eckler guys, yeah, their value will go up, but a lot of the other running backs won't. If you add a point per or half point per carry, it makes those running back values go up. I mean, how many points is that going to be for Josh Jacobs this past year, or Derrick Henry pretty much any year where he's healthy? It's a ton of points to give out. I would say instead of doing that, just go to half point PPR. And then the receivers are still being rewarded a little bit more so than the running backs. And then you're not rewarding a point per carry. There does come a point where there's just too much scoring and too much to worry about in fantasy. And maybe this is one of those things. But if it works for your league, then absolutely do it. So there you have it. 7 concepts to make your fantasy league bigger and better and more fun than it's been. Now, if you've watched this and you've got a reaction of your own, don't hold it in. You can comment on the video, you can tweet me at Dave Richard, or you can email me, drichard@cbs.com. Yeah, it's my real email address. I'll get back to you. Let's make fantasy fun. This is a great way to get it started. Talk with your league commissioners, talk with me about it, and let's put something out there that takes fantasy football to the very next level.